it is completed or it is done. The nutrition in some of the provinces, especially in the central areas, you have very high rates of malnutrition. And this is mainly due to the kind of diet that they have. It is rice-based. And they don't have the protein and the vegetables. So we have one of the programs where we are encouraging family gardening where they will have much more protein, raise animals, grow vegetables. And so we hope that will have a better impact. So we choose the families with the malnourished children to help them and assist them.
How do you see your work resulting? Do you actually see a benefit?
This was a preliminary trip for us. I had heard a lot about Vietnam from the Vietnam Veterans Foundation, who actually helped do a lot of the communications for us to get us here. And they've been working here for a lot of years and told me a lot and given me a good education. So I feel like I came in here knowing a lot. I feel, as Abla does, the lifting of the embargo is the best humanitarian act that can happen between the United States and Vietnam.
What's your impression otherwise about Vietnam in general? How far behind are you?
Probably not as far behind as it seems if the embargo is lifted. I think that opens up a whole new world to them. You know, 5 years from now, if the embargo is lifted tomorrow, this place won't have water problems, it won't have malnutrition problems. A lot of that stuff goes away.
You've lived here for 2.5 years?
Yep.
Have your impressions of the place changed during that time?
Oh, it's changing very rapidly. Very rapidly, especially in the south. It's possible that Ho Chi Minh will be another Bangkok.
Hello.
And people are very hardworking. So given the chance, that this place will be really developing very quickly.
What does it mean to be another Bangkok?
You know, with the tourists coming in, with the building and the hotels and Vietnam is a beautiful country. It could be a beautiful tourist area. These resources are not really exploited.
How often do you see Americans?
I see Americans, they're passing through as visitors, as consultants, as people who are trying to come and find out how they can help and what can be done.
In the 2.5 years you've been here, what have you learned that you didn't like about Vietnam? What bothers you about what you see here?
The bureaucracy.
Lots of bureaucracy?
And changing of rules.
Changing of rules? Is there much law here?
Well, there are rules and regulations. Sometimes they change. And finally you get used to it and you have to accept it, just like in any other country. But I hope that one day the policies will be clearer and will invite much more investors to encourage them to develop the country.
Let me ask you both the general question about what kind of work you do. How did you get interested in it in the first place?
Well, I'm a UNICEF staff member, so we rotate, and I opted to come to
But how did you get interested in UNICEF?
That's a long story because I have been there for the past 20 years.
Are you still a Lebanese citizen?
I'm still a Lebanese citizen.
And when you first got into UNICEF, did you have to come to the United States to the UN to begin it all?
No, I started in Oman, in the Sultanate of Oman, in 1973.
Michelle, how did you get started in this business? And how long have you been doing it?
It was kind of a transition from political interest, changing to issue-oriented interest. And I figured instead of going after or helping elect politicians who I thought were good on the issues, people are going to get elected, you have to teach them about the issues.
Who did you work for?
I always worked for myself.
And I'm sorry, in politicians, did you work actually for a politician before? Or just in
No,
campaigns?
I helped a lot of campaigns.
Anybody that we recognize?
No need to mention names.
Is that because this is a non-political position you're in?
That's right.
How many people work at your foundation?
We are There is no payroll. Anybody who works with us does it voluntarily. I have from members of Congress to private sector people who do a lot of things for us. Travel with us, do all sorts of things. Paperwork, mailings.
Thanks. See, Will's walking over there.
Nhớ sức của ta.
William Fleming of the U.S. State Department. What did you hear you want to comment on?
It's all very familiar. The Amerasians saying why they want to go to the United States, the fact that some have been at the center longer than others. I might mention that I mentioned about the funding. You had asked about the funding. We also, in addition to the construction of the center, we provide per capita payments for each, since January 90 when the center opened, each Amerasian that leaves, we provide a per capita payment it's $80, and there are two other per capita payments. $80 is for the running of the transit center. And that's for each Amerasian that leaves, not necessarily, they don't necessarily have to stay at the transit center. And all of them do not necessarily stay there. But this, the $80 provides for the food and the utilities and the personnel and such. The other parts of the per capita payment, the total, about $137 each, cover fees for travel to the interview site and for personnel costs and administrative costs of the Vietnamese government in contacting local areas to get lists of Amerasians.
$80 a month or a year?
No, it's $80 per capita. We pay it monthly based on the number of Amerasians and family members that leave Vietnam. And then $80 of that per capita payment, of the $137 per capita, go to the running of the transit center per capita.
Maybe a better way to ask it is how much money a year does this cost us?
Last year, I believe it was close to $3 million, because we have, I guess it varies from month to month, but about 1,500 average perhaps leaving each month, times 1,500 times 137 each month, then it adds up to a good bit. So we have continuing financial support.
Let me ask you a question we didn't talk about before we went on the air, because one of our colleagues on this trip spotted a person that you just saw, I won't point out which one,
right,
said, I'd like to adopt that individual. And I assume somebody watching this is going to do the same thing. What happens if somebody wants to adopt an Amerasian and bring him to the United States?
Well, if it's an Amerasian, the child or the young adult now will be accepted into the program. You were asking about how long do the orphans and all stay there. They stay there while they're being processed, and until such time as they are either accepted or rejected, and then they would leave. That's what the deputy director was saying. But to adopt an orphan child, it's kind of the same process as anywhere else in the world, whether it's Amerasian or otherwise. If it's Amerasian, the child does not have to be adopted because it can go to the United States. At that point, it would depend on the child's age in the United States if someone wanted to pursue adoption.
But where does that child go? And let's take, for instance, there was an African-American face with a little baby, right, and the woman. Let's say that she is accepted into the program, right, and she goes to the United States. Where's she go?
Well, first of all, she'll go, if she's accepted, she'll go to the Philippines Refugee Processing Center. It's a 6-month cultural orientation and English language program for Amerasians. Near the completion of that period of training, contact will be made with the Refugee Data Center in New York, which will arrange a sponsorship from a voluntary organization in the United States that will take on the responsibility of meeting the person and helping them get established. The arrangements if I might mention, as a result of the Amerasian Homecoming Act that began to take effect in March 1988, it was sponsored by Congressman Robert Marzek and Thomas Ridge, it made it possible for Amerasians to come to the United States as immigrants, Amerasians and their family members, as immigrants, but at the same time to get refugee benefits. In that way, they did not have to establish that they were refugees. By virtue of the fact that they were Amerasians, they could come to the United States. So that was a very useful step. And therefore, they do get refugee benefits when they come to the United States through these, the voluntary organizations and the support of the U.S. government for a period of time so they can get established.
Somebody watches this and says, I want to do something about this, I want to get involved, I want to spend my money to help those individuals. Who should they contact?
Well, they can contact voluntary organizations such as USCC. They could, in fact, call my United States Catholic Conference. There are many different organizations that deal with Amerasians. I would be happy to send them a list if they want to contact me at the Department of State. Can I give the phone number?
Sure.
It's area code 202-663-1031.
And when will you next be in your office?
Right after lunch.
Well, I mean,
no,
today
that's
right.
right.
But I mean, Tuesday after Memorial
Tuesday,
Day?
right, yes.
That's 202-663-1031.
Right. And that's the Bureau for Refugee Programs in the Department of State, the Office of Asian Refugee Assistance, and I'll be happy to
All right, let's pick one of the little people we saw, some, you know, the young children, and some of them didn't seem to be attached to anyone there. But let's say that you have a young boy or a young girl who is not an Amerasian, and they're in this center at this moment. What will eventually happen to them?
Well, if they're in this center at the moment, they are most likely, I'm sure all of them, are members of the Amerasian's family. That little girl you saw,
right.
She's a half-sibling of the Amerasian. And they are usually interviewed together with the Amerasian, and they will go with the Amerasian if he is accepted.
Oh, they will
Because
go.
the Amerasians can take their mother, their foster father, and half-siblings up to the age of 21. And as a result of a recent amendment to the Act, now they can also take their wives and children. So it's an attempt to keep the family of the Amerasian together so that they have a better chance in the United States.
Did we, as a country, do anything up until the Act in 1988 for Amerasians, between 75 and 88?
Well, in the early 80s, we began talking to the Vietnamese. We said we wanted to bring the Amerasians to the United States. There was initial law enacted that was a bit complicated because of the qualifiers to allow the Amerasians to come as immigrants. And then subsequently, in the early 80s, we began interviewing some, and they were allowed to come as refugees. It was only in 87 with the Amerasian Homecoming Act that the Vietnamese government agreed with us to let us have access to large numbers of Amerasians, and they began coming in the thousands. So the Vietnamese government was very, very cooperative in dealing with us to advise the local officials and getting out the word to register Amerasians throughout the country. And that's continuing. So we're happy with the cooperation and the assistance of the Vietnamese government in this area especially.
By the way, do you know the total, we've been using the figure 750,000 Vietnamese in the United States, people who were born and raised in Vietnam and moved here at some point over the last several years. Is that an accurate figure?
That's, as I've heard different, I think that's close to quite accurate, yes.
Now, again, and I know we talked about this earlier, and I'm still confused as to how many people that live in the world today are considered Amerasians. Total number of people that are here on this earth as a result of an American that got involved in the Vietnam War.
Here on this earth in Vietnam.
Either
and
place,
now in the
either
US.
here in the United States or in Vietnam.
You know, as I said initially, it's really hard to tell. About 75,000 Amerasians and their family members have come to date. We have lists of we're expecting lists of about 20,000 more Amerasians and family members. And we hear people who have visited Vietnam seeing people in the countryside saying that they didn't know how to get into the program. So it's indefinite how many are out there. That's why we want to try to work with the Vietnamese government, even when the bulk of them are reached, to try to leave the door open for those that come in late.